Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tipoff 2023-2024. Ron Poniwaz is joined by Mr. Larry Kelly, member of the Luxembourg Garbett Kelly and George law firm. He is also the former varsity baseball coach at Shenango and a former ninth grade boys basketball coach at Newcastle, currently an assistant coach at Penn State Shenango. Larry Kelly, welcome aboard.
Thanks, brother. It's an abbreviated show today because yours truly over here still has that day job, and I got some obligations later tonight that involves my real job as a lawyer. So let's get started.
All right. So this week we have two segments. First off, we'll tell you about a young lady that had a really strong week for her team as Athlete of the Week, and then we'll have our secondary topic as we always do. First off, Larry, Athlete of the Week, Neshannock's Ryan Owens. Owens is a 5'7" sophomore guard forward for Neshannock High School, and last week she had 3 games, 8 points in a 53-21 win over Riverside, 12 points in a 48-45 win over Mohawk, and 14 points in a 45-41 win over West Middlesex. 2 section wins for the Lady Lancers. Larry, your thoughts on the victories?
Yeah, well, 2 hard-fought section wins. My daughters played in that section at Riverside many years ago, and those games against Mohawk, those games against Neshannock, they were always hotly contested. And it's one thing to score double figures in a blowout game, but to score double figures in 2 3-point games that were 1 possession games going down to the last few seconds of the game was pretty impressive. Well deserving of Athlete of the Week.
Yeah, in her performance against Mohawk, she held Aaron Capaldo, the leading scorers for the team and one of the leading scorers in the county. And so it wasn't just what she did on the offensive end. Also, it was what she did on the defensive end.
I always appreciate defense. I really do. My daughter, Ariana Kelly, she was the defensive stopper for Riverside back in the day. She was always charged with the responsibility of guarding the toughest opponent and the high scorer on the other team. So the fact that Ryan can score double figures and put the stop on the team's best player, that warms my heart.
All right. And Neshannock's 5-0 in Section 1 3A action. This is through Wednesday night's games, 10-4 overall. They're now up a 1.5 games over Beaver Falls, which is 4-1, 9-4. A lot of youth on that team, Larry, and Neshannock's Ryan Owens is one of the leaders of that group.
Only a sophomore, and in my experience in coaching high school athletes and high school basketball in particular, there's a lot of growth that occurs both physically as well as mentally as you proceed through your career, junior, senior year. You become a better player, well-rounded, both mentally and physically. And Ryan Owens is off to a great start.
Okay. That is our Athlete of the Week, Ryan Owens, a 5'7" sophomore guard forward for Neshannock High School. She is our Athlete of the Week. We have one more segment. It's our other topic that we do, and we'll do that next right here on Tip-Off.
We all know there's an advantage to being the home team, to playing at home. And at LGKG, we have been your home team for personal injury cases involving automobile accidents and workers' compensation claims for over 90 years. At LGKG, over 10,000 clients have trusted us to represent them. We know how to present your case to a Western Pennsylvania jury. We know what makes them tick. We know how to win.
We're back with you here on Tip-Off for one more segment, and this one is one that Larry Kelly will enjoy talking about. Larry Kelly, as a former member of the 9th grade boys basketball coaching staff, the head coach of Newcastle 9th grade team, you have a lot of dealings with Ralph Blundo. And recently, Ralph Blundo had quite an accomplishment. He set the program record at Newcastle for all-time winningest boys basketball coach. Right now, at Newcastle, Ralph Blundo is 325 wins, 55 losses, and in his career, which includes one season at George Junior Republic, he's 351 and 57. So Larry Kelly, just talk about Ralph Blundo. I will let you have at it. As a wrestling announcer would say, this is a 1 hour time limit or television time remaining.
Well, the record speaks for itself. So I don't think we need to talk much about his excellence as a high school basketball coach. But, it goes back to the very first meeting that I had. We had a staff meeting, and geez, that was back in 2010. And as I looked around the room, I thought that day, wow, I'm looking at probably, there might have been 8 people on the staff, both junior high and varsity. And I said to myself, I'm looking at, 4 or 5 of the toughest people I know and 4 or 5 of the smartest people I know. And the guy sitting at the head of the table is both tough and smart. And so, I think Ralph's, success has been due in large part. First of all, let's start with the players, Ronnie. He'll be the first one to tell you it's always about the players. And we've been blessed at Newcastle to have really talented athletes. And I'll say this much. Everybody knows the X's and the O's. Every basketball coach that's up there knows the X's and the O's. I'm not so sure they know them as well as we knew them at Newcastle, but everybody knows them. I think Ralph's gift, and I've always said this, was his ability to get our kids to play harder than the other team. And, it sounds easy, but it really isn't. The ability to play hard and to play with intense laser focus at the same time. And we use that word a lot, and Ralph used that word a lot, I think is really his gift. Our kids played hard and they played smart and they were focused. Ralph's ability to get our kids to not only play hard, but to execute both offensively and defensively to a high level is what has made him and our program at Newcastle successful. Again, everybody knows the X's and the O's, but it's one thing to run a play and run a defense. It's another thing to execute it. At Newcastle under Ralph, we executed both offensively and defensively. People used to marvel at our full court press and our half court trap. And the reason it was so good is not only did we have great athletes, but they executed. They were in the right spot. They were able to read, the offense and where they were going with the ball. And again, that's the mental aspect of the game. And again, from an offensive standpoint, you just watch Newcastle execute. You watch them set screens. You watch them, rub off screens, just the way you're taught to do it. And then, of course, defensively, when the ball goes up, you watch about how many of our players don't run to the basket like a field mouse, but instead go find the player they're guarding, get a body on them, and then come and get the rebound. So it's all of that makes Ralph successful.
Yeah, you mentioned how he always says it's the players. Another thing he will mention is a head coach is only as good as his assistant coaches, and he's surrounded by great assistant coaches, and he always has been, and he always gives credit to those assistant coaches that he has with them. You've been on those staffs, down the end of the bench, in playoff runs. A lot of intelligence there. They know what they're doing. They share their insight.
Well, I mean, we had Jason Dunlap. We had David Richards. We had Mark DeMonico early on. Of course, we had Bobby Nattel. We have Billy Humphrey. Those guys have been on the staff forever. And it's that kind of continuity. We know each other. It's easy to make suggestions, and we laugh because Larry Kelly used to make a lot of suggestions. It's really tough to be the guy to make the call. And Ralph was always the one that had to make the call. And, listen, we made suggestions, but he made the call. The biggest thing that I think coaches, I had a coach call me, about Shenango baseball. He's now going to coach the 7th and 8th grade team. And he wanted to know, what is important for a junior high coach to do? Because I coached junior high sports. And I told him, the most important thing you can do, and this was so important at Newcastle, is create a culture. Well, what does that mean? That means you show up for practice on time. that means you show up for practice with your practice gear on and ready to go. If you're a baseball player, you have your baseball pants on and your baseball hat on. And if you don't, if you didn't come to practice at Newcastle with your practice gear on and ready to go, you were sent home. Was that meant to be punitive? No. That was meant to establish a culture. That is the most important thing you can do, is establish a culture. Because if you allow a player to forget his gear, to show up late, you're doing two things. You're ruining the culture, and you're probably crippling that young man for life. Because in the real world, Ronnie, you better show up on time and you better show up ready to go. And so, I think as a junior high coach, I wanted to create a culture. And I used to tell my kids, I said, you think I'm tough? No, I'm Cinderella compared to the guy that's waiting for you at the varsity level. So, we had a lot of fun at Newcastle. We did. We used to sing on the bus, and the kids, of course, my sayings over and over again, they used to make fun of me, and I'm okay with that. But when it came time to put our game face on or to put our practice face on, the culture at Newcastle was established that you are ready to go. And I think that's another thing that Ralph does probably better than anybody else. And that's why he is who he is. And that was made clear to us as junior high coaches. But the guys that he picked, you know who the first three junior high coaches were? And it pales in comparison. Larry Kelly had the 9th grade team. But the two guys that coached the other junior high levels, I can't hold a candle to Pat Kane, maybe the greatest athlete ever to come out of Newcastle. He understood the culture. He was the 8th grade coach. And Bobby Nattel, again, we laugh, a great coach, a tough guy. He agreed to coach the 7th grade team the first year. Why? It was important that at the junior high level, we did everything that we could to develop that culture so that when they got to Ralph, these kids already knew what was expected of them, and he just finished the job. He is the gold standard for coaches, at least in my view, in the WPIAL. I don't know that there's 4 or 5 that are in that circle, right? And John Charandria, the former coach at Newcastle, was probably in that circle. But John Miller's in that circle. There's 4 or 5 that are in that circle, and it's a circle that is not overly populated, but Ralph Blundo certainly is within that group.
Yeah, you do realize that the more you mention Bob Nattel, we have it written in his contract, an unofficial contract, that multiple mentions of his name, and he gets to appear on our show one week.
Bobby's a great coach. Listen, I told you, he may have coached the biggest and most exciting game ever to be played at the Newcastle Fieldhouse in 1993. Newcastle Butler, my dear friend and client, John Charandria, was on suspension that day for picking up a few technical fouls at Beaver Falls. Bobby Nattel had to coach the game. The Fieldhouse was packed. We win by 2 points. It went down to the last possession. My man can coach him up when he has to. So I know you like to bust his chops, but my man Bobby Nattel, he was a great player, and he's a great coach.
All right, we have 2 more things with Ralph Blundo. If you have time, if you don't, we'll pick one. If you have time for 2, naturally practices are probably what are we talking? A couple hours, somewhere around?
Well, they're about an hour and a half. We learned that it's hard to keep that laser focus for more than an hour and a half. So we tried to limit it to 1.5 hours.
What was film study like about, because he puts a lot of time into that too.
I was after practice. What we would do is after practice, we would buy the kids food. We ate pizzas, we ate sandwiches, and we would go into one of the classrooms and probably spend a half hour watching film, sometimes longer. When we did have film study, we normally cut the physical practice a little shorter because you can only keep a kid's attention for so long. So if we were going to go film study for an hour, we maybe only practice for an hour before that. Film study is important, and nobody did it better than Ralph. Nobody did it better than Ralph. And Jason Dunlap, he watches the film on the other team, breaks it down. We run through it at practice. Our guys probably knew the plays of our opponent better than they knew it. And a lot of that credit goes to Jason.
Yeah, and nobody knows when this day will come, where Ralph will say that that's enough, and he's had enough, and he's going to walk away from basketball. We don't know if it's 10 years from now, 15 or 20 years from now. Nobody knows. But at some point, Larry, I'm going to give you some names, and I'm going to ask you one simple question. What do these guys all have in common? Gene Bartow, Bill Russell, Tom Bradley or Bill O'Brien, Frank Solich, Jimmy Johnson, Bill Cowher. What do those guys have in common?
I think they all followed a legend who was the head coach before them. And I'm not, listen, I don't know who's following Ralph. Let me tell you something. Those will be big shoes to fill. Big shoes to fill. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't know that Ralph's going another 10 years, my friend. We've had private discussions, he and I, that'll stay private, but he doesn't have 10 more years in him. I mean, it's just, when you're in season, it's 10 hours a day, Ronnie. By the time you break down your opponent's film, you break down your film, you practice, you watch film after practice. It's physically and emotionally exhausting. I remember I told him after our WPIAL and then state championship run at Shenango Baseball, I said, Ralph, it had to be over because I was physically and mentally exhausted. In baseball, you can't watch film. We would play our playoff game, and me and Coach Eddie Urian would jump in a car and drive 2.5 hours to go watch the team we're going to play. Ralph said the same thing. He said, that's the way I feel. When the run is over, whether it's a WPIAL run or a state run or both, as a coach, you are physically and mentally exhausted, maybe more so than the players. And it's a young man's game. I always kid Ralph. I say, I'm old enough to be your father. I might not be quite old enough, but I'm close. And Ralph's getting a little bit older, my friend. And it's a little bit tougher physically and mentally as you age.
He's got me by a few months, so be careful there.
Yeah. So you know how old he is. So
right.
Again, I don't think Ralph's going to be around 10 years, but the guy that has to take his place, I don't envy that man.
Yeah. And I don't know if I mentioned Jimmy Johnson in that mix too. He succeeded two legends, Tom Landry and Don Shula, I believe.
Yeah. Yes, he did. Right. So, yeah, those are big shoes to fill, and they'll be big shoes for Ralph. He's a gift to the city of Newcastle, especially, our kids. Our kids are a little bit different. They come from a different socioeconomic background. Ralph is a great communicator. Sometimes his words are a little tough, but the kids know that he loves them. And so he can hold them accountable. And again, Ronnie, if you don't hold young men accountable, you're crippling them for life. I've always said this. I believe that a high school coach's job is to mentor young men because the high school coach is the bridge that a young man crosses from adolescence to adulthood. And part of my job as a high school coach was to make sure that they learned the lessons that will help them be successful when they cross that bridge and they're in the adult world and they have a real job and a real family.
Yeah, and Ralph Blundo overtook Phil Breidenbaugh, who previously owned the wins record at Newcastle. Phil Breidenbaugh with a record 319 wins, 159 losses, and really appreciate what is standing on the sideline coaching the kids from a coaching perspective, from a student athlete perspective, from a fan's perspective. And certainly media perspective. He's great with everybody, players, his staff, the fans, by giving a lot of wins and great success, great moments.
And let me give a shout out to the administration at the Newcastle Area School District, the administration, the principals who are his bosses, the superintendent and the school board. They don't meddle, Ronnie. They don't meddle. They allow Ralph to do whatever he needs to do to be successful and provides us everything that we need to be successful. I give a shout out to them. I really do. They know what they have, and they allow Ralph to coach them up the way it's necessary to both win basketball games and to teach those life lessons that will allow these kids to be successful.
In my prepared itinerary for today, I told Larry the secondary comment would, or a secondary topic would warm the cockles of his heart. Larry, has this segment warmed the cockles of your heart?
I love Ralph Blundo. Listen, growing up, I always wanted to be a coach at Newcastle. You know, God pointed me in another direction and I became a lawyer. But when I got that phone call from Ralph and he asked me to be a part of his staff, I will be forever grateful for that. And I tell him when I hit my knees at night, I thank God that Ralph Blundo gave me a chance to coach up the kids at Newcastle High School.
All right. He's Larry Kelly. I'm Ron Poniwaz. We appreciate you for joining us this week on Tip Off. Be sure to get out and watch some of the basketball games that are going on throughout the week and whatnot. We are now at the section turn, so we're at the halfway point. Playoffs will be starting real soon, and we'll be back here next week to talk more basketball. Thank you again, Larry.
Thanks, Ronnie. Stay in touch, brother.
Yep. Take care, everybody.
Bye-bye.
We all know there's an advantage to playing at home, to being the home team. At LGKG, we've been your home team personal injury attorneys for auto accident and workers' compensation cases for over 90 years. We know what works and how to win. We have all the credentials. At LGKG, we don't take every case. We handpick our clients so that we can give you the attention you deserve.